BetterHelp Online Therapy bought this 30-second ad to remind you right now, wherever you are, to unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, take a deep breath in and out. Feels better, right? That's 15 seconds of self-care. Imagine what you could do with more. Visit betterhelp.com/randompodcast for 10% off your first month of therapy. No pressure, just help. But for now, just relax.
Seven things you don't really need to know, but probably should. I'm Ciara Revin, and this is the Sunday 7.
I'm Ciara Revins in for Jamie East this week, and on today's episode of the award-winning Sunday 7, we find out why the government is planning to DNA map your baby, check in on what RFK Jr. is doing to America's health, and get good news on a galaxy far, far away. Plus, Will Guyatt, the Smart 7's resident tech guru, celebrates 20 years of Apple Podcasts and tells us why Google could be on the naughty step. If you're enjoying our episodes, please do like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We're here 7 days a week at 7 a.m. with the 7 biggest stories on the Smart 7 in association with Metro. Before we get started, though, it was on this day in 1995 that US Space Shuttle Atlantis docked with Russian space station Mir to create, for a 5-day at least, the largest man-made satellite to ever orbit the Earth. The appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the position of Secretary of Health for the United States never seemed like Donald Trump's smartest decision. RFK Jr. is a long-term conspiracy theory fan with a history of anti-vaccine pronouncements and a range of theories mostly disproven about the origins of autism. Now that he's in charge of the US's health, he's been busy cutting research funding and even presenting recommendations which turned out to be written by AI and included non-existent scientific studies. He fired all of the members of the Advisory Committee on Immunisation Practices, or ACIP, whose job it is to recommend to the CDC which vaccines should be provided for the US population. He's restaffed the panel with allies who share his view, and on Thursday they voted to restrict flu shots for certain groups.
ACIP recommends children 18 years and younger receive seasonal influenza vaccine only in single-dose formulations that are free of thimerosal as a preservative.
That was Martin Kulldorf, a Swedish scientist who was one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which may ring a bell from the pandemic. He and others argued for a herd immunity approach to COVID-19 unsuccessfully, and the substance that the new ACIP is worried about, thimerosal, is the subject of many conspiracy theories. It has been used as a preservative in vaccines since the 1930s, and because it contains what is known as ethyl mercury, it's been blamed for all kinds of issues. However, scientific studies are shown that it does no harm, and it should not be confused with actual mercury. But in any case, it's not widely used anymore. It does suggest the RFK's approach to medicine, which also includes removing fluoride from water, may cause long-term damage to America's health down the road based on flimsy science and internet theories. Democratic Congresswoman Kim Schrier gave the new health secretary a stern talking to this week at a congressional hearing.
You're now on the record. You lied to Senator Cassidy. You have lied to the American people. You have lied to parents about vaccines for 20 years. And I also want to be clear that I will lay all responsibility for every death from a vaccine-preventable illness at your feet.
The big issue is that this kind of scepticism of vaccines has wider impact, and with rates dropping across the world, there's a real risk of the resurgence of diseases like measles and polio, which were once considered defeated. Professor Elizabeth Whittaker is a paediatric expert in infectious diseases, and she told BBC Radio 4 that alarm bells should be sounding.
On a global scale, there are huge issues in terms of disruption to vaccine programs from conflict and displacement of people, but also resources, and that's something that needs to be addressed. The initial drop that you see, the stalling and the drop, happened during 2020 when vaccine programs were disrupted directly because of the lockdowns and concern about patients going to healthcare facilities. They tried to pick up some of that, but a lot of children never caught up those vaccines. And then increasingly there is some mistrust secondary to the pandemic, where people who never worried about vaccines, but there was so much mistrust about vaccines that they now question it, and they don't have the same opportunity to get those questions answered.
This week in tech sees another giant turn 20. We've already had the cake and the candles out for YouTube, and this time it's Apple Podcasts. It was back in 2003 that the idea of podcasts first emerged, with Guardian journalist Ben Hammersley credited with inventing the name. When it comes to the history of tech, there's only one man we have on our Nokia 3310 speed dial, and that's the Smart 7's tech guru Will Guyatt. So Will, 20 years of Apple Podcasts. They were quick to get involved, weren't they?
It's easy for companies to celebrate how they've made something possible, but it was Apple's early-ish adoption of podcasting as a format that helped take it mainstream. You could do it elsewhere before, but everybody with an Apple device could do it far more easily when they got involved. And when Steve Jobs first bigged up podcast integration in iTunes, it became the first time you could easily find, subscribe, and build a podcast library in one place. And that's a principle that hasn't changed in 20 years. Cheers, Steve.
How big is podcasting now, and have Apple been able to stay relevant?
Today, podcasting is a global industry. There's around 4.5 million podcasts indexed worldwide, and the number fluctuates up and down a bit. Apparently, around 600 million of us listen worldwide to podcasts now, and more of us are doing so on a monthly basis. Heartwarmingly, Apple has really pushed and promoted podcasting, and it's remained a fairly open shop. Now that means that while Apple devised and built a fair amount of the structure and tools that surrounds modern podcasts, they've also allowed other apps and services to exist in the space too, something that many other tech companies would have had a really hard time doing.
How are they celebrating?
They've launched a 20 years, 20 podcasts we love list to celebrate the format, with some heavyweight names from the past like Serial and some current big hitters in there. However, there must be a mistake in the version I'm reading, as the Smart 7 and the award-winning Sunday 7 have been missed off.
Should we expect a card from Tim Cook?
If Tim's listening, I'd rather have a discount on my monthly Apple One subscription.
Slightly less reputable tech giant behaviour went on this week too. What are Uber being accused of?
Things have been pretty quiet in the world of Uber for the last couple of years. When it first came to the UK in 2012, I found myself being literally screamed at by angry London black cab drivers who held me personally responsible for the amount of coverage it was receiving on radio. Then there was fighting with Transport for London over its ability to get a licence to operate in our capital city, and that was before the company's US founder was booted out for some pretty dodgy behaviour. Now we've heard from a second major academic institution that suggests Uber is using secretive algorithms to increase its profits at the expense of both drivers and us, the punter. Boffins at New York's Columbia Business School say Uber have implemented price discrimination to raise fares and cut pay. They analysed 2 million trips in Ubers in the US, and this follows a similar UK study announced a few weeks ago from the University of Oxford that looked at 1.5 million trips.
So, dynamic pricing doesn't do us any favours then.
So while they may call it dynamic pricing, it's doing plenty of favours for Uber, but definitely not for us or the drivers. In 2022, Uber globally lost $303 million US, but last year it generated a $6.9 billion US profit, which even in my limited maths tells me is a rather large swing in their favour. The percentage of the fare going direct to Uber went from around 32% to 42% in the US, and from around 27% in the UK to often over 50% of the journey. That's why the company is now generating far more money.
What's Uber's take on it?
On the release of this second report, a senior boss at Uber said, "We ask the public to judge us by what we've done over the last 5 years and what we will do in the years to come." Which feels to me a bit like the equivalent of, "Yeah mate, I'm just round the corner."
And the competition watchdog is after Google?
We could be seeing a huge change to how internet search works here in the UK if they get their way and tighten up how Google is regulated. Google searches currently account for over 90% of search queries in the UK, but the reality is that AI tools like ChatGPT are rapidly eating away at the total number of searches. It looks like the Competition and Markets Authority are getting ready to give Google what they call strategic market status, and if they do, there will be a ton of tools at their means to greater regulate the company. And they say they want Google to include an option to choose an alternative search engine alongside their search bar, and that is a huge change. They've also made other suggestions about making how searches are chosen more transparent, but then admit that making that possible could be rather difficult for them. As you might expect, Google have responded and said that the CMA's considerations were broad and unfocused, and that they were considering a range of interventions before they'd asked for evidence. Google have now threatened to delay releases of new tools to the UK, and that's close to fighting talk.
Is this tied into the demand that they sell Chrome?
The short answer to your question is not directly, but there is a growing focus from politicians around the world to challenge the dominance of tech companies like Google, and the suggestion to sell Chrome is one of the current options being discussed in the US, and of course disputed by Google. But it's another fine example of how our laws and legislations worldwide are just too slow, because by the time these new measures come in to regulate Google's powers, Google's power may have been tempered by the rise in search of chatbots like ChatGPT and other AI chatbots just making up stuff and replacing actual answers on the internet.
Still to come on the Sunday 7, in association with Metro, the UK is building a DNA map, and we visit some galaxies far, far away. The government is due to reveal its new 10-year plan for the National Health Service in the next few weeks, but we've already seen some indications on the scale of the plan, which was the announcement that every newborn baby will have their DNA mapped. That's to help assess the risk and prevent onset of hundreds of diseases, and it follows on from a pilot study last October, which saw the DNA of 100,000 British babies mapped. Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the intention is to try and leapfrog illnesses. Dr. Helen O'Neill is an Associate Professor of Molecular Genetics at University College London, and she says it's an important project.
At present, there are about 3.5 million people in the UK who are living with a rare genetic condition. That's about 1 in 17 people. When we think about implementing screening, it offers us the opportunity to look at hundreds of genetic conditions, but to catch them at a much earlier stage. Early intervention always saves time and money.
While the project has had good intentions, it will also create a massive database of very personal details for a whole generation, which may have unintended consequences. As we've learned from DNA services like 23andMe, the size of database has potential commercial value, but there are also ethical questions about how the information and potential diagnosis of diseases is treated. Professor Rameen Shakur is a professor of genomics at the University of Brighton, and he says that the ethical aspect has been considered.
This is something that's been discussed wholly, and the ethics and the inclusion of many involved in the wider ethics and medical ethics communities, as well as, more importantly, patients themselves, has led to us having a very robust, transparent system of consent.
We've become accustomed to stunning images delivered from space telescopes, from the Hubble to NASA's new James Webb, which is the largest telescope ever launched. But spare a thought for Earth-bound astronomers. There are over 600 observatories across the world, and they too spend hours scanning the night sky. The Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile has just begun its work. It's been more than 20 years in the planning, and it is what is known as a large synoptic survey telescope. The US has part-funded the project, which costs an eye-watering £600 million, but already is capturing extraordinary images from distant galaxies. In fact, in its first 10 hours of operation, it identified over 2,000 new asteroids, and astronomers are extremely excited at the potential for new discoveries on a galactic scale. William O'Mulan is an Associate Director for Data Protection at the Observatory, and he says the world's largest digital camera could be a game changer.
We're changing fundamentally how we attack problems. We're providing a lot of statistical information. So rather than the usual, I'll take a couple of observations and I'll write a paper, no, I'll give you 1 million galaxies. I'll give you 1 million stars, or 1 billion even, because we have them. 20 billion galaxy measurements. So it's going to really change and challenge the way people work with their data. And so I think this is just going to be unbelievable. But the most important thing, and the thing that we're all going to be waiting for, is that variable sky and all the things we didn't expect. So I think that's going to be the big thing.
Still to go on the Sunday 7, in association with Metro, Elon's got a Neuralink update, and we meet some carjackers.
Right after this.
There's nothing better than treating yourself, except maybe treating yourself to high-end, top-quality pieces at half the cost. That's what Quince is all about. From European linen apparel starting at just $30 to handbags crafted from the finest Italian leather, Quince can elevate an everyday outfit at a fraction of the price. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the markup. Go to quince.com/style for everyday affordable luxuries with free shipping and 365-day returns.
Welcome back.
Now that Elon has given up his unofficial job at the US government, he's back to work on SpaceX, Tesla, and of course his brain chip company Neuralink. Neuralink has had some success with its 3 human volunteers so far, and we've covered some of their stories before on the Sunday 7. Elon has just raised an additional $600 million to fund more investment, and he's keen to look at more specific areas of the brain in the next phase.
In the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be doing our first implants for vision, where even if somebody's completely blind, we can write directly to the visual cortex. And we've had that working in monkeys. Actually, I think one of our monkeys now has had a visual implant for 3 years. At first, it'll be fairly low resolution, but long term, you would have very high resolution and be able to see in multispectral wavelengths. So you could see in infrared, ultraviolet, radar, like a superpower situation.
But Neuralink isn't the only company that wants to get access to your brain. There's also a company called BlackRock Neurotech, which is owned by crypto company Tether. They're convinced that their product is superior to Neuralink and that they've already planted chips in 40 patients. CEO of Tether, Paolo Arduino, was talking up his favourite tech asset on the Big Brain podcast this week, and he says developments are fast moving.
The next iteration of that brain chip is just insane. And what I want to do to compete in a different way than anyone else is to build an open source brain operating system. I believe that in the future, in the next 15 to 30 years, this will become the next smartphone. Maybe we are in time to build a technology that is open source, so that if I have to put in myself, then I'm not going to be controlled by, I'm a paranoid guy, so I just want to make sure that everyone is playing on an even playing field.
Last year, over 60,000 cars were stolen in the UK, which is a doubling of the number stolen back in 2015. 40% of the cars were keyless, and the technology, which allows car thieves to intercept signals and access vehicles, has been a focus of the new government. They've introduced a new law which will make the devices used in these thefts illegal, but there are concerns that it may be too little, too late. This week, Channel 4's dispatches went to investigate the matter and found themselves late at night being shown how it all works by a car thief known only as T.
So this is our amplifier. This is catching the signal from the key inside the house. Key even having a battery in it that's constantly scanning for the car to rearrange. A lot of these cars getting broken for parts. A lot of them getting shipped out. Albania, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Greece.
What percentage of the cars you steal get broken up for parts?
80-90%.
90%, really?
Yeah.
It's alarming how easy they made it look, and owners should be aware that someone outside the house can intercept their key's signal. Police Constable Ian Thwaites is from the Port of Dover Police, and his job is to try and catch the car thieves as they look to ship the cars to Europe and beyond. But he says it's a thankless task.
They're so easy to steal, that's the problem. We've had quite a few cars going through tonight, freight vehicles. It's not the luck of the draw, but, when I'm not here, it must still continue.
The black rhino is one of the world's most critically endangered species, not necessarily because of climate change or environmental factors, mainly because of poaching. Black rhinos have 2 horns, which makes them twice as valuable for poachers, and it's estimated that 96% of their population was wiped out between 1970 and 1990. Conservation efforts have stepped up since then, with the rhinos being dehorned for their own protection. This week saw good news for the rhino, as a breeding group of 5 males and 5 females were transferred from South Africa to the Zinave National Park in Mozambique. The move was in part funded by a donation from the People's Postcode Lottery and organised by the Peace Park Foundation. Anthony Alexander is the foundation's programme manager, and he says the hope is that the group will breed and help to protect the future of their species.
Scientists say we need somewhere around 15 plus, 16 plus. So these additional 10 rhino will bring us to no more than 20. And with that, it's a viable breeding population from both size and genetic variety. And we hope that in future years we can start repopulating other conservation areas in the country. It's got a very suitable habitat of shrubs and bushes that black rhino like. So it's putting them back into the landscape that they used to be.
This has been the Sunday 7. Wherever you're listening, do us a favour and hit the follow button. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. with the regular Smart 7. Have a great rest of your weekend. Written, produced and published by Daft Doris.
Ready to elevate your everyday? Quince has the luxe staples insiders swear by, minus the markup, From 100% European linen styles and 14-karat gold jewelry to gorgeous leather bags and elevated home finds, Quince has it all. And by partnering directly with top artisans and ethical factories, Quince delivers premium quality at half the cost of similar brands. Discover everyday luxury without the markup at Quince. Go to quince.com/styleupgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/styleupgrade.